Ma'am, go on.
Very good evening. On behalf of Impact and Policy Research Institute, IMPRI, New Delhi, Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC at IMPRI, and Gender Development Center for Research and Innovation, I, Manorama Bakshi, accord a very warm and hearty welcome to you all to a web policy talk hosted by IMPRI. The state of gender equality, gender gaps in post-pandemic world, policy shifts and priorities. IMPRI has hosted a series of webinars post-COVID, providing communities, to students, nonprofit organizations, policymakers to navigate the current COVID-19 crisis. As we address today's talk, the gender gaps in post-pandemic world, policy shifts and priorities. I will give you a very brief background about the subject, and following that, I will be speaking about the keynote address of today, who will be giving us keynote address, Ms. Urvashi Prasad. India has implemented several policies, laws, programs to promote gender equality in various spheres of life. While several indicators pertaining to women's agency, literacy, health, and economic status have undoubtedly improved over the years, several challenges, however, do persist. Deeply entrenched is patriarchal mindsets, inequitable development, as well as sheer diversity of beliefs, customs, and practices that has made it difficult for India and some other countries and world over to truly achieve gender parity in all walks of life at the pace that would be desirable. Slow progress on gender equality, of course, gender hampers the progress of society. Further, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has caused enormous setbacks, aggravating the pre-existing inequalities and increasing vulnerabilities in social and economic systems. This talk will explore some of the governance mechanism that can be adopted by India to strengthen the implementation of existing gender-related laws and policies, as well as highlight additional measures which, if introduced, would help us accelerate our progress towards becoming a truly gender equal country. The keynote speaker of today's discussion is Ms. Urvashi Prasad. Ms. Prasad has extensive experience in health, nutrition, sanitation, gender, and public policy. Ms. Prasad is wearing multiple hats. For last 4 years, Urvashi has been working as public policy specialist in the Office of Vice Chairman at Niti Aayog, which is the premium policy think tank of Indian government. She is currently holding core team supporting the work of Government of India, Empowered Group 1, for managing the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. Urvashi is member of task force for overseeing the implementation of sustainable development goals in India and has, to her credit, co-authored India's first voluntary national review presented at United Nations High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development in 2017. So far, Urvashi has had almost more than 100 publications in leading national and international newspapers, journals, digital platforms to her credit. She is the member of World Economic Forum, Expert Network, and alumni of World Economic Global Shapers Community. Urvashi completed her bachelor's from University of Birmingham, UK, followed by MPhil from University of Cambridge, and also has a MSc from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Now, viewers, I'm giving it over to Ms. Prasad, and she will take it further through, she will present her presentation now. Ms. Prasad, please go on.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction to the topic and also for a very kind introduction to my background. I'd also like to mention that I have a colleague of mine also on this webinar today, and she'll be adding, a lot of points in certain areas once I'm done with my presentation, especially on the economic aspects. She works in the economic and finance team, also with the vice chairman at NITI. So she'll be able to bring in a lot of the, female labor force participation issues and others. Of course, I'll be touching upon them as well in the presentation, but I think she can add a lot more color to some of these aspects. So I'll just start off the presentation with some of the progress that we've made till date. This is a very complex issue. It can be a very depressing issue when we look at all the areas in which we are lagging behind. So I thought we'll start off by noting some of the progress that we have made on different gender-related dimensions. And then we will actually move on to the challenges. And as I said, there's a lot of challenges that are before us, even before the pandemic. And now, of course, the pandemic has exacerbated some of these, as you said in your introduction. And then finally, we will move on to the sort of the way forward. Where do we go from here? What are some of the governance mechanisms we can put in place? What are some of the measures we need to take? So if I start off with the progress, we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is really some data from both the economic survey in 2018. Actually, the economic survey in 2018 very comprehensively covered gender. And also, of course, the National Family Health Survey data that we have available. So this sort of has looked at both of those sources and a number of indicators which pertain to women's agency, attitudes towards women, and of course outcomes in areas like health, nutrition, age of marriage, literacy, access to bank accounts or saving accounts. A lot of these we have made progress. Of course, there is huge question marks about how equitable this progress is, whether this progress is adequate or not. And of course, in most of these indicators, it is not adequate. But at least we have been moving in the right direction, at least on a number of these parameters. Next slide, please. So yes, so here I just wanted to highlight some of the government schemes, and these are of course some of the more recent government schemes. Of course, programs have been implemented for women, several programs over the years, but here I'm just highlighting some of the more recent ones, which have been quite prominent in the last few years, and just some key indicators and statistics from those. So if we look at MGNREGA, which actually stipulates women's participation to be at a minimum of 33%. In the last 2-3 years or so, actually, the participation of women has been much higher. So it has been above 50%, almost 55%, which is, of course, encouraging. Similarly, under the National Livelihoods Mission, there are a large number of self-help groups which have now been linked with banks, and many of these are of course women exclusive. Then the Jan Dhan Yojana, which many of you would be aware about, the Jan Dhan Yojana has also enabled access to bank accounts for a large number of women, and these are of course mostly women from the underprivileged backgrounds. And then the Mudra scheme, which is another flagship scheme of the government, which aims to provide credit. Here too, we have seen that a fairly large number of beneficiaries actually are women. Next slide, please. Now moving to some of the political participation indicators. Now, in general, this is a front we are not doing very well on at all, and I'll talk about that as we come to the challenges. But we have seen some improvement in the representation of women, and this is data from the lower house of parliament over the last 5 years or so, and there's been a marginal increase, of course not adequate at all, and I'll come to that. But at the panchayat level is one level where we have actually mandated 33% reservation for women, and that has at least enabled a large number of women to participate in the electoral process. In fact, the estimates suggest that around 1 million women are elected as representatives at the panchayat level every 5 years, and this perhaps makes it one of the largest mobilization of women in public life globally. So this is of course one area where we've taken one major step forward, but as I said, we'll come back to this because there's huge gaps here. On nutrition and maternal health, again, there's been some marginal improvements in various indicators. In some indicators, there's been stronger improvements, especially due to things like institutional deliveries going up, and several schemes being launched to address anemia, basically the intergenerational cycle of malnutrition, as well as to provide various maternity benefits to women. There's also been a recent scheme which was launched a few years back, which aims to at least provide partial compensation for wage loss in terms of cash incentives for women. Next slide, please. So now we'll move on to the challenges, and this is really where we'll be going into quite a bit of detail. Next slide. So if we look at, I've just tried to group it under some major headings. As I said, this is a vast topic. So there will be certain things perhaps that are getting missed out, and we can look at those in the discussion. But starting off with the sex ratio at birth, now this is again something which the Economic Survey in 2018 had noted. And I put this here because the issue is not just of sex selective abortion, which of course we have had a terrible history of, and it's led to what the survey termed as 63 million missing women. But the other dimension to this is that because of our obsession with having sons, people keep having children until the desired number of sons are born, and the girl children who sort of precede the male child, the desired male child, actually fall into this sort of category of unwanted girls. And this is really very important as well, because these are probably children who the parents didn't really want, and their welfare and development is therefore perhaps getting neglected in a big way. So this is important, because one part is the abortion, and that's of course something we need to address, the sex selective abortion. But also, what about these so-called unwanted girls? What do we really do with that? So this, I think, is a fairly startling sort of number which the survey put out. But the sex ratio itself, we can see that the problem is that there has been a decline, and Niti Aayog actually comes out with a performance on health outcomes index, in which one of the indicators is the sex ratio at birth. And in one of the editions of the indices, it was found that this ratio had actually declined in 17 out of the 21 large states. So this is, of course, a very, very worrying picture, because we are not just looking at the sex ratio at the national level, but obviously we are wanting to look at a much more disaggregated picture. Next slide. Now coming to health and nutrition, which is a huge piece. I mean, I could have spoken this entire presentation just about that. So I'm here touching upon some very, very, sort of high level points. One, of course, as we know, malnutrition, as I said, we've made some progress, but we have a huge way to go. It's around 1 in 2 women in the 15 to 49 year age group are estimated to still be anemic, and this is completely unacceptable. Then when we look at cancers, and I brought out the cancer point because it also has a link with the post-COVID era, because we know that in COVID times, not only has maternal health been disrupted, of course, maternal health has been disrupted. A lot of women haven't had their antenatal checkups. Of course, childhood immunization, which sort of follows from that, that has also been disrupted. But what has also gotten disrupted is screening for many women, and we were already doing quite badly to begin with. Here I have just put the numbers for breast cancer and cervical cancer screening, and it's really a very small percentage of women who have ever been screened for these two diseases, which are actually very big killers. And we are actually ranking very high even globally in terms of the number of women who actually lose their lives to either breast cancer or cervical cancer. So this is going to be a very important area for us in the post-COVID era as well. We will have to do a lot of catch up here to ensure that we can at least try to pick up these cases early or prevent them as much as possible. And then the third bullet that I really wanted to highlight here was mental health. We simply don't talk about it enough. I think we don't talk about it enough for men and women. But like with most other issues, with women, the challenges get even worse. So this is a statistic which shows that 15 women for every 100,000 female population in India actually lose their lives to suicide. And suicide happens to be the major cause of death for Indians in the 15 to 39 years age group. So if we think about it, this is supposed to be the most productive time for an individual, and we keep talking about our demographic dividend. And here we find that actually we are leading the world in terms of suicides in this category, and 71% of those suicides are actually women. So this is again a huge area for us, hugely neglected, and also an area which might have been adversely affected by the pandemic. We do know that a lot of women have additionally suffered during the pandemic. There's been increase in domestic violence. There's also a flip side of working from home, women having to do additional caregiving or additional tasks at home. So again, I have highlighted this point because I feel that this is another very important one that we'll have to look out for in these post-COVID times. Next, please. Yes, now the labor force participation, which has of course been a huge issue for us. As I said, I'm just going to touch upon it sort of briefly and make some high-level points, and then my colleague Pankhuri, I'm sure she'll have a lot more to add to this. But our labor force participation has declined, and this is of course well known. A lot of women, majority of women are still confined to the informal sector. So even a lot of the policies that we make are mostly just for women in the formal sector. They don't even impact the lives of women working in the informal sector. So that is a huge challenge. Of course, unpaid, invisible work for women is so much more and nothing in comparison to men. The access for women entrepreneurs, because we talk a lot of women entrepreneurship now, but access to credit, formal financial credit, is still pretty low. As I said, we have come up with schemes like Mudra and other initiatives, but when we see the overall picture, this access is still fairly low, and women also get rejected for loans much more than men. And then, of course, a lot of the other issues for women who are working, in sort of the formal sector, who are working, going to offices. There's distance to the workplace. The work hours are inflexible. Childcare, there's hardly anything for childcare in terms of creches, transport, safety. There are so many issues that are actually hampering the participation of women in the labor force, as well as women who want to re-enter. And this is another huge area for us, women who take a break for family reasons, for other reasons, and then wish to re-enter the workforce. It is really very difficult for them, and the atmosphere is not conducive at all. Next slide, please. Another area, of course, and this is something, as I said, it's also worsened some aspects of it during the pandemic times, but it's anyway a difficult situation to begin with. This is the statistics on crimes against women, and actually they have been rising steadily. This is latest data from the National Crime Record Bureau, which just came out a few weeks ago, which showed that crimes have been steadily rising. Of course, there's always the debate that is it because of better reporting, or is it just because actually more crimes are happening? So that debate, of course, still remains. But nevertheless, just as we look at the statistics, they have been going up, including the violent crimes, the sexual crimes. There has been an increase in all of these. And another very disturbing one, which I picked up from the National Family Health Survey, the latest round, that every third woman between the age of 15 to 49 years experiences some form of physical or sexual violence during her lifetime. But what is more alarming and disturbing, even more than these statistics, is the normalization. And 52% of women and 42% of men believe that a husband is actually justified in beating his wife. So it just shows the sort of mindsets that we're up against when we're talking of dealing with these challenges still. Next slide, please. Yes, next. So the next few slides, I'm going to just highlight through some examples the inequity in progress, because I think from a policy perspective, it's not about always coming out with a new policy or a new scheme. I think we have a lot of policies in place. We have a lot of schemes in place. In some areas, yes, we need more. But even the ones we have, we don't do a very good job of implementing them uniformly. And I think that is the biggest issue for us to address, whether it's a scheme in nutrition, whether it's a scheme in health, whether it is something we are doing for women's safety. We see huge variations between and within states. And that is really at the heart of what we need to address. Otherwise, we can simply keep coming out with new legislations, new policies, new schemes. And if we continue to have this uneven implementation, we will never overall achieve the kind of outcomes that we expect. So here, I just wanted to highlight that through some examples. This is a slide that is captured from the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, which was done between 2016 to 18, and it provides us indicators, how we are faring on various indicators in nutrition. But what it also provides us is what is the coverage of several high impact interventions. And here I've picked out some of the interventions which relate more directly to women. So interventions like iron folic acid provision during pregnancy, or breastfeeding counseling, or then during lactation, food supplementation. And finally, we move on to the antenatal visits and Anganwadi centers, and we move on to the childcare part. But what I've tried to show here is, and the dots that you will see on these slides are basically where different states are at. So this is not to get into the details of this, but this is just to give a sense that you can see a huge variation. If you just look at something like iron folic acid, which is the very first bar, while on average it might be something like 60-70%, you can see that it is varying from as low as 40% to going up to over 90%. So we have to address these variations. The interventions are there, these are evidence-based interventions, but until we can bring uniformity in the implementation, we're not going to be able to really move forward on these as a country, as a whole. Next, please. And this is from the NITI SDG index. So we come out with an index which basically maps the performance of states on various sustainable development goals. So on the left hand side, you can see just some of the major indicators here. Of course, there's sex ratio, there's labor force participation, there's women who've been victims of crime, and of course, there's political participation through number of seats held by women in state legislative assemblies. So these are just sort of snapshot of indicators which are used to build this index. But you can see here, it's really not a pretty picture. Most of the country is in the red, which means that these are all states which are considerably lagging behind, even on just these select few indicators. And it's really literally only 3 states, union territories here, which are actually at least making some sort of average progress, but even they are not in a strong position. So it just shows how sort of long a way we have to go when we are looking at this particular metric of gender equality. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are again 2 slides between Haryana on one side, and then you have Chhattisgarh, Kerala on the other side. So we can see a wide variation here. Next slide. And similarly for the total fertility rate, because this is another important metric that we track, you can see that in Bihar, for women are having on average 3 children. There's more than 3 children per woman, and whereas it's much lower when we look at West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Punjab on the other side. So of course this is slightly dated in terms of the data, but it gives a sense of how much variability we actually have to contend with here when we talk of a policy level perspective. Next, please. Yes, and here is also similar sort of data on crimes against women. So this is basically looking at sort of changes over a decade, well over a decade actually. But the point here is again the massive divergence between states. In some states, we found significant reduction. when we look at something like spousal violence. Whereas in other states, we have status quo. In some states, now more recently, the data we get, it has even worsened. So there is a huge spectrum of variability when we are looking at any of these indicators. Next slide, please. Yes, and here I just wanted to touch upon, I think a lot of people would be aware of this because this does get covered in the news a lot, but I thought, for the sake of completeness, we'll mention it here. The global standing, where do we stand globally? And of course, we have an index which the World Economic Forum comes out with. And on the latest ranking, we had again dropped 4 places. And again, the rank is definitely not a good one. In fact, on health and survival, we're doing very badly, as are we on the economic gender gap. In fact, out of the 153 countries that they have in this report, we are the only country where the economic gender gap is larger than the political gender gap. For education, actually, we have made some progress, especially when you look at enrollment of girls at the primary school level, for instance. We have made some positive progress. But again, as we start getting to secondary school, higher education, we again start seeing a divergence between the enrollment of boys and girls as well as completion rates. So again, the benefits that we get at the primary school level, they sort of get mitigated by what ends up happening at the secondary and higher school levels. And political empowerment, now this is, of course, we have had a female head of state, and we had one very early on. So this actually allows us to rank quite highly at 18, but it doesn't really reflect our current realities. A lot of this rank is actually only pushed up because we've had a female head of state, and as we know, even in a country like the US, it took them so many years before they could even have a female vice president. So yes, so unfortunately, this would be something to be happy about if it reflected our present realities, but it doesn't really do that. The next slide, please. So, I mean, it's a fairly grim picture when we look at all of this. And the question, therefore, is: can we actually, really make a difference here? Is gender equality like some sort of distant goal or distant dream, or is it even doable? And I think in that we need to learn even from poorer countries. I think we often end up talking about the Nordic countries and what Finland has done and what Sweden has done or Denmark has done, and that's all very well and good. But I think it's very important to look at countries which are actually much poorer, which have had years of struggle. And I think Rwanda is a fantastic example. That was a country which was completely decimated. And they just managed to take a series of pro-women reforms. Gender rights are now a very critical part of their constitution. If you look at their parliament, women fill up nearly 2/3 of the seats in the parliament. They comprise at least 50%, more than 50% of secondary school enrollees. And I said secondary school is really important because you can get girls into primary school, but it's of little use if they drop off at the secondary school level, which is what happens in India. And over 54% of the workforce also is women. And interestingly, the salary gap between men and women is one of the smallest in the world in Rwanda. And of course, they have invested heavily in maternal, newborn, child health. So the point is that if we really give priority to this area and we realize that the progress of the country depends critically on how we fare on gender, then it's very much possible. It is difficult, no doubt, because we are a very large, we are a very diverse country. And that was really the point I was trying to make by showing all these differences between states, that, we really are not a country which, you can have this one size fits all, or which you can govern very easily, because there's so many differences. But if we take those decisions and and every part of society decides that this is something that needs to be prioritized, it's very much doable. And we must look at examples like these to get inspiration from, and also to get ideas from on what we can do. Next slide, please. Yes, next one. So I'll move into the way forward section. And as I said, this is a huge topic. So I will just be touching upon some of the high level things. This is not completely comprehensive, but this is more to sort of just touch upon what I think are some of the very critical issues that we need to be looking at. So the very first one, and actually drawing inspiration from Rwanda, but also countries like Finland, we do need a gender monitoring unit. And you know, this can be structured in different ways, but we do need such a unit in our ministry. And we have a Ministry of Women and Child Development. We have departments for women and child development at the state level. But what they are not consistently doing is regularly collecting data on different aspects pertaining to women, because as I said, you know, when you look at women, you have to look at health, you have to look at education, you have to look at safety, you have to look at their agency, you have to look at workforce. There are just so many different aspects that until and unless there is one single unit where all these data points are regularly being collected, reviewed, we cannot really make policies and schemes which are responsive to the needs of women. And that is the sentence I have put at the bottom, that women are not a homogeneous group, right? Women are at different life stages, women are in different geographies, they have different levels of education, they can be in different kinds of groups. There are women with disabilities, there are widows, there are all kinds of women. It's not one uniform group that we're talking about here. So if we are to make legislation and policies which are gender sensitive and which incorporate the needs and requirements and aspirations of all these different categories of women as well as women at different life stages, we need to have that data. Today, we really don't get it at that level of frequency, at that level of disaggregation that we need. So that is why, and at Niti Aayog also, we have been making a very strong case for this gender monitoring unit. We've been pitching for it very strongly with the WCD ministry here, and as well as in our discussions with states. And we had actually gained some momentum, but then the pandemic happened, so some of these discussions took a backseat. But hopefully, this is something that we will actually follow through on in the days and weeks to come. Next slide, please. And this is something that will actually build on these indicators. And of course, Niti, we do already come out with a lot of indices, and actually the purpose of the index is really to highlight some of these issues. And we find that our experience with the health index has actually been quite positive with states. Of course, there are gaps, of course, there are challenges, but at least it helps us to highlight certain issues which otherwise don't get the kind of attention they deserve. So once we have this sort of data being regularly collected, regularly reviewed, we can easily come out with a comprehensive gender-based index. We can pick up a few indicators. We don't need to make it very cumbersome, because indices can be difficult to develop if we have a lot of different indicators, but we can pick up at least a subset of indicators, and we can continuously feed back to the states. More than ranking states, or more than saying that you are number one or number two, it's more about providing regular feedback to states that, look, this is where you stand on gender related aspects, and these are the areas you need to really focus on. So that, I think, is really important. That is something that has not happened so far. You know, gender related indicators are in different indices. As I showed you, in our SDG index, there are some, in our health index, there are some, but there's a need to pull it all together and really constantly highlight this. I think we end up talking about gender issues sometimes only when, you know, there's a major episode or something happens or something goes wrong. But if we want to constantly highlight this and constantly keep it at the top of sort of policy and political attention, then we need to develop such mechanisms. Next slide, please. So then I'll just now talk about a few areas where, and these are some more granular sort of interventions, points, strategies, and a lot of this draws from Niti Aayog actually has come out with 2 documents, and you could have a look at those. They are on our website. We came out with a 3-year action agenda. And more recently, in end of December in 2018, we came out with a strategy for New India at 75. So there are a lot of specific points on gender in these, and we actually use these when we're trying to push forward some of this agenda with ministries here as well as with states. So this is, I've just picked out a few points. As I said, these are not completely comprehensive. So on education and skills, of course, we need to look at financial incentives. We need to look at other means for keeping girls in school and for being able to curb this very high dropout rate that we see, especially at the secondary school level. Then we also need to look at skills. And of course, this is true for men and women, but more so women. Women often get stereotyped into, certain type of work. But we need to look at the non-traditional work for women as well and ensure that our skill development is focused on these. And again, there are good examples here from countries like Brazil, which have launched very large-scale programs to promote skill development among women in the non-traditional areas. And of course, organizing women, because we've seen the power of self-help groups in many parts of the country. So organizing women into groups, into guilds, using the platforms of Digital India, now that we have a push for digitization. And again, a lot of this has happened even more now because of COVID, and use of technology has gone up a lot more. So we need to use it smartly to ensure that we can, organize women, aggregate them into these groups, which basically enhances their bargaining power considerably. Next slide, please. So I have a couple of slides here on employment and entrepreneurship. As I said, my colleague, I think, will add a lot more to this. But I've just put out some of these high-level ones that we as NITI believe are very important. One is that we feel we need to put in place very time-bound targets for reversing this decline in the female labor force participation. I mean, we keep talking about it, but we need very clearly defined targets for, where do we want to be, and then how do we think we're going to get there. For the formal sector, as I said, we do have certain laws which are already in place, like the Maternity Benefit Act, there's Sexual Harassment of Women at Work Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act. But the implementation of these is again often quite sketchy. And so we really need to find means for implementing these. Whether we do it in partnership with obviously employers, we find different mechanisms for doing it. But the implementation is the key, because there's no use having all these laws which mostly remain on paper or are implemented very unevenly. Then, of course, we do need to focus on more sort of equal opportunity policies for women. And we, as I said, we really need to look at leveraging technology, how women can work part-time, how women can work from home. Of course, a slight caveat, or rather a word of caution, which I think has become very clear to all of us, that work from home can have other adverse impacts for women. So we just need to consider those. There are certain unintended consequences of always working from home as well. So of course, we need to factor those in. But in general, use of technology, the fact that now, most of the world is working remotely, really we should leverage this in a big way to ensure that more women can participate in the workforce. And then, as I said, have some very liberal, at least guidelines, even if they are not laws, but at least guidelines which can encourage women to re-enter the workforce after they take a break. Next slide, please. And here are again some specific ones. So these are more on encouraging women's participation in industry, and then asset ownership, and then agriculture. So on industry, sort of looking at, as I said, credit for women entrepreneurs and really making those pathways much easier and much more even. As I said, a lot of women entrepreneurs, their loans, the rejection rate is much higher than men. So that is something that we need to address. This is something we've discussed quite a bit, that can we consider incentivizing sectors or companies that have at least 30% of women workers, and can we provide them some sort of additional tax benefits? Asset ownership is again a big area, and if you see our documents, we've tried to cover it quite comprehensively. But here I've just put out a couple of points in terms of prioritizing women farmers, for instance, who are seeking to lease land or water bodies at the village panchayat level, and of course joint registration with spouses or sole registration even of land in the name of the woman through certain concessions as well as through special drives and awareness campaigns. So because this asset ownership plays a very important role, and we've seen that. And then on the agricultural side, ensuring greater membership of women farmers in the farmer producer organizations, and possibly even considering a separate budget to bear the registration processing fee for registration of women FPOs. Next slide, please. And so this is on safety. Again, as I said, each of these can be their own area by themselves. There is so much to be done here, but I've just highlighted again some important points here. One is when we think of our cities, we don't really think of gender as an important part of it, or women's safety as an important part of it. So whether it's our public transport, whether it is women who are coming in from different towns, different or even villages to work in a city, where do they stay? How do they travel safely? So this is a very important piece, and we're trying to have some discussions with the urban ministries here as well on this, that gender has to be a very central part when you're planning a city, when you're thinking of the design of public transport. You really have to factor in gender into that. Then training is very important for different categories of personnel who deal with women, deal with survivors of violence. Women, they already go through a lot. And then when they have to deal with the system, they have to again go through an ordeal, and sometimes that ordeal is even worse than what they have already suffered. So we need to keep training, and it's not just training in terms of the legal aspects or what the police should be doing. Of course, those are important, but also sensitivity, empathy. This has to be again and again inculcated and drilled in, especially in these categories of people, whether it's the police, the protection officers, the health practitioners, legal service authorities. They interface very directly with survivors of violence. And so this becomes a very important trait when we are looking at training. We also need to train and have standard operating procedures on some of the newer forms of crimes. Of course, many more men and women are getting online now. We are seeing the incidents of cyber crimes going up in a big way. And a lot of these personnel are actually not used to dealing with these kind of crimes, because they have been trained to deal with the more conventional sort of crimes that we see. So how do they really deal with something like this is also, we need the standard operating protocols, and we need to continually have trainings for them on this as well. And then, of course, the final point on this, the judiciary. There's really much to be desired there. We do have the fast track courts, we have all of that, but we still see huge pendency. And of course, now we are also looking at the online system, what judiciary can do more efficiently perhaps. How can we bring in more technology and efficiency into that system? So it's yet to be seen if that will impact the cases that we have in terms of crimes against women. But in general, there is huge scope of improvement in terms of the whole judicial system. Next slide, please. And yes, political participation, I think unfortunately we have lacked the political will for this. Whichever party we look at, the bills just remain pending in Parliament for the longest time. And frankly, we will have to bring this in at some point, and we keep advocating for it. Whatever we can do from our side, we definitely push for this. But ultimately, of course, it is a decision which has to be taken at the highest levels. But even the draft National Policy for Women 2016 also says that this reservation should be brought in. And we've seen that in the panchayats. I mean, yes, there are questions of women, do they truly have the sort of agency? Do they truly have the autonomy? Or are they sort of just put up there? And you have men still driving the agenda from the background. We see this debate happening at the time of elections, during voting also, where we consistently are hearing that a large number of women vote now. which on the face of agency and autonomy they truly have is of course a question. But at least to facilitate this participation, at least to bring in more women into the political sphere, we will have to bring in some sort of reservation, because clearly it doesn't seem to be happening organically. There are some parties which do better than others. There are some, as I said, marginal improvement in numbers, but we are really nowhere near where we need to be on this aspect. The next slide, please. Yeah, and this is my final slide. So I think whatever I have spoken about so far, mostly spoken about government action. And I think we know that government action alone will not suffice. I've mentioned here an example from the private sector. Women are grossly underrepresented in the top level leadership roles. So you will have a lot of women at the junior to the mid levels, and then suddenly, completely, you see them dropping off the charts. Barely 5% of companies on the BSE 500, for instance, have women CEOs. So this is something that is very important for all types of stakeholders to really introspect, because it's not gender equality, more women, whether it is in your company, whether it is in the political sphere, wherever it might be, actually leads to much better outcomes. And makes a lot more economic sense as well. It's not just social or doing something good. It makes perfect economic sense too. So I think that's why I left with this point here on this slide, that right from ensuring transparency in recruitment, promotion policies, to systematically recognizing biases that creep into wages, gender biases that creep into wages, especially as we move up the ladder. This is something that the private sector also has a very, very big role to play, and that is why in the title I put public, private, personal partnerships, because it will of course need the government of course has to steer most of this, but we need the private sector, and then ultimately we also need citizens, each one of us, if we are going to really be able to address something which is as mammoth as this. So I'll stop here, and I look forward to the discussion, as well as comments from my colleague who's been hearing this very patiently as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, for continuity, should we have Pankhuri ma'am get in now, chip in now?
Yes, I think that'll be great.
Yes, Dr. Pankhuri there.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but your video is off.
Yes, thank you for that. Just a minor correction. I'm not qualified enough to be called a doctor, but thank you. It felt nice. Urvashi, thank you. Thanks a lot for a very detailed presentation. And I don't know why you're saying it's not comprehensive. It is presenting the conditions and the inequality in a very, very detailed and comprehensive fashion. So thank you for highlighting these issues. As far as the economic indicators are concerned, every single aspect that you touched, education, nutrition, or health, actually, the numbers today are going to help future parents make economic decisions. So every time a family chooses not to give a healthier meal to their daughter, but to a son, or to send their sons to a private school and daughters to a government school, or reflects in the fact that men today earn more than women. More men have jobs than women do. So this is a grim situation, not only today, but it also has strong implications in the future labor forces, for the future labor force as well. So we have to talk about these inequalities, and it is very important to highlight that all our decisions today are going to affect the labor force participation rate in future as well. So to talk about more about unemployment, economic opportunities, and participation of women in the labor force as entrepreneurs, you correctly highlighted again that credit and access to lack of finance is one of the major hindrances that is not letting women participate in as entrepreneurs as often as they would like to. These have several reasons, like you pointed out, lack of collateral, or their own ability to raise funds is often judged. So women are often asked to come through self-help groups. A few women are asked to take, form self-help groups, and then they are given a loan. Uh, it's unfortunate that we are willing to give men more loans and access to credit, but women are asked to prove themselves before they are. It is a provision. It is a good provision where women who have no collateral, who have no savings, can avail this channel. But it just also highlights the way we treat a woman borrower from a male borrower. Then. Thanks to the government initiatives, lack of identity cards, government issued identity cards, that has actually helped improve the access of women to financial accounts. The Jan Dhan program is doing really well, but having accounts does not mean that women are using these accounts to their benefit. A lot of women want to have the privacy of using their accounts and the control over their savings. Literature suggests that when a woman has control over her finances, she saves more and she invests more in health and education of her children. So digital financial inclusion and empowering and making women digitally literate is another step that has to be taken. Again, Government of India has launched the new financial education, financial literacy program, which is the step in the right direction to help these women. But again, we are still a long way ahead to the fact that where women are actively using their bank accounts to their advantage. So simply having a mobile phone does not mean that they are actually using it. We also saw during the COVID times that women were queued outside the banks to just take that 500 rupee transfer that had been made through the JAM Trinity. So market participation, or ensuring that more and more vendors are allowing for last mile connectivity, can encourage women to use their digital applications to make purchases as simple as those of groceries or medicines, etc. Now, coming back to the other issues that limit labor force participation rate are flexibility of work hours. As you rightly pointed out, that more women, women do most of the household chores as well, and are also the primary caregivers for children and elderly. The flexibility allows them to work formally, when they are done with their household chores. Part-time work option is something also that we have to explore, because a lot of women after childbirth or after marriage prefer to work in the formal sector, but through part-time employment only, because they can only work a limited number of hours. Then work from home options, you rightly pointed out that it has certain negative impacts also, but it actually also allows women to pursue their careers. It has been the pandemic that way has been a huge factor in encouraging women to work from home. uh, Lack of paternity leaves, or family leaves, is also something that is missing and has to be encouraged. More and more men have to be encouraged to take child care, and especially after birth, seriously, and avail those leaves again. And the last bit is, when a woman decides to have a child, that is when she's penalized by if she takes a break, by not allowing her to be a part of the workforce, or by cutting her pay, or to let her be on only half the pay. So these are the things that actually limit a woman's participation in the formal workforce also. Then comes the part of information asymmetry. A lot of women who want to be entrepreneurs or want to do freelance work do not know how to start their business. They don't know how to do the taxations, they don't know how to do accounting for the business. So providing them with such support mechanisms is also very important. Now, once again, I would like to highlight the Government of India, and especially Niti Aayog, is doing commendable work in this direction through their a program called WEP, which is a Women Entrepreneurship Program. But again, we have been able to help urban women entrepreneurs, sorry, but we still are in the process of helping rural entrepreneurs. as far as Panchayati Raj and leadership management goes and representation goes, I mean, Dr. Duflo's research back in 2004 showed that disadvantaged groups benefit more when a woman is in charge. Then, as far as the suicide rates go, 71%, you said 71% of women in the age group of 15 to 39 are actually the ones who commit suicide. This is also the time or age when most people peak in their career. They move from starting jobs to middle management and are on their way towards senior management. And this is also the time where most women take a break to take care of their children, or they take a step back saying that, look, my primary responsibility is towards my family, so it's okay if I don't get promoted. So that, again, everything that you've highlighted indicates how our decisions affect the labor force participation of women. And to conclude, I would just like to go back in history and say that Gandhi, who uh, himself said that it's not just women alone who have to change their mindset, it's also men who have to change the way they work, and men and women have to come together to ensure that this inequality in the society is reduced. So again, we have to talk about it, we have to discuss this. Both men and women have to sit together and have to discuss inequalities. Men have to change their attitude towards their work lifestyles, whereas women have to change their attitude towards their social lifestyles. And hopefully we'll be able to bring the change that we all anticipate. So thank you once again for the lovely for the discussion and the meaningful solutions that you have presented before us.
It was really wonderful listening to both of you, Ms. Urvashi Prasad and Ms. Pankhuri Dutt. Whether you call yourself doctors or not, but we really treat you as doctors because these are the experts made you the doctors. I've heard Ms. Prasad earlier, and it's always a pleasure listening to you. And what really impresses me most that when we listen to you, we don't feel that picture is presented one-sided. I mean, if I see this, there are areas of lot more kind of challenges that we are, as part of the women's movement, we are talking about, or as researchers we have been talking about. This is true that a lot of progress has been made if we look at since the independence and all this, but not enough. That is the always question. So with regard to the really challenges or areas where sex ratio at birth continues, declining workforce participation rate is further declining, and COVID is really a mirror, kind of gives us a mirror situation that what is really happening with regard to women. So that is, I'll come to this point, but this is really the crux of the matter. Second is also that you pointed out, which most kind of impressed me, about normalization of violence. Now this normalization of violence among men and among women, that this normalization of violence among women is most distressing if we look at this kind of thing, when the survivor or the victim herself or himself says that this is a justified act, that I should be like this, I should be treated like this, and I deserve to be punished. I mean, that means that the situation is very, very grave when it has affected our mindsets. So this is the most challenging thing that I find, that is one thing that we need to address. A challenge also, I agree with you when you say that these areas of agreement, new policies for skill participation in non-traditional areas. Yes, we need non-traditional areas. We need women's participation in digital spheres. So we need to reverse declines in labor force participation rate. But what has been we need, and what is have been happening? Further decline in the COVID picture analysis comes, further decline in labor force participation is taking place both in the rural and urban areas. And very distressing to see that rural areas kind of thing is also happening. Whole of agriculture, livelihood kind of peoples is happening with regard to women, and what I'm not able to understand really why this kind of thing is happening even in rural areas. So this is the I don't know to flexible working conditions. It has yes and no, both sides, because this is we were all promoting flexible working conditions, and until we realize two things, that care work, where a woman spends most of her time, is not recognized. That is the kind of, so I get up as a woman at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., and I work continue till 10 o'clock in the night, and this work is not recognized as work. I become not as a worker, not as a, but as a consumer, and as a liability to the society, liability to the family, and liability to this kind of thing. And care work is very much part of the sustainable development goals. For the first time in history, probably there has been a concern which feminist economists have raised, that what about the care work, the women spend. So I think we need a little bit care work, attention to care work. That would be very, very important. India has been making path-breaking changes, and not only in with regard to women's empowerment, but other kind of things also. We acknowledge that, and that's why there is a hope that we need pushing. Not if we need kind of arguing for these things and pushing this kind of from the women's movement, from Niti Aayog, which is a think tank, there is going to be a progress. That is what one of the things that is very important. What are the missing areas I wanted to address? Because you have been so comprehensive, and really one would talk of missing areas, both Urvashi Prasad and Pankhuri Dutt, that one of the things has been really about the social norms. That would be unless the social norms are changed, and social norms not only are kind of something soft, it's very, very hard. They influence our policy making. For example, head of the household concept. We don't have the head of the household concept when we have the right to vote. Then each individual counts, each adult counts. But when it comes to the economic rights, then we start talking about who is the head of the household. Poverty reduction data, head of the household. I'm not saying India is only doing it. World Bank also does it. For the first time, I think now the debate is going on whether we need the head of the household or we do not need the head of the household. Because once we talk of the heads, they act like chiefs in some societies. So others are whatever the layers of the discrimination, layers of the exclusiveness, all is lost in that head of the household concept. That is the kind of question. I don't use the term female headed household for the same reason. We want men in the household. Why do we should talk about only the female should be the head? Neither female should be head nor the man should be head. It should be like economic right, should be like a political right. That should be there was a time earlier when only one person could vote, and that was the head of the household in the West. We got the right to vote just as a matter of without any struggle, as part of the freedom struggle, and we got without any kind of struggling for the right to vote. But we stuck to that. After that, as if everything is stopped, we have liberated, so-called, we have liberated women and nothing more to be done. So that is if you look at the history from 1939, when women that set up that, what was the National Planning Committee was set up, all this demand for property right, demand for individual rights within the family, they are all articulated, particularly economic rights. Women wanted their property rights, women wanted their unmediated property right, but not without the mediation of the head household or its head. So that I think we need this kind of recognition. That is one point I wanted. We are all affected. We are here all Indians. We know really how much social norms are affecting us. We can't go out in the evening, not because we want, we will be attacked by somebody's brother, somebody's husband, somebody's father. I mean, it is not really that we will be attacked by lions and all this. This is the society we are making when we are talking of women's protection and women's right. That is the masculinity that we are developing in the name of the kind of freedom. And we need these masculinized norms to be changed. patriarchal system to be changed, how the masculine kind of forces that are growing up in the name of modernity. I'm not saying I am all believer in modernity, but modernity has to be very, very civil, very equal kind of thing, that that in the real sense, the modernity has to be. Unpaid care, of course, has to be, besides, Pankhuri suggested that about paternity leave. I agree, or Urvashi, you also said about the paternity leave. But paternity leave itself will not really suffice unless it is implemented, which you also pointed out, the lack of implementation. So reduce, recognize, and redistribute. These are the kind of has developed in the, these three things have been developed with regard to the care work. And I think nothing Eastern or nothing Western about them. We want to reduce women's unrecognized work, and the whether it is not drudgery, it is a necessity. But if it is done by all, then this drudgery becomes distributed, and nobody feels that one is a drudgery reduced. It needs to be recognized. Economists have to work, and they are working on it, because feminist economists have pushed them. Both men and women are the feminist economists I'm talking about, not this thing. And redistribute. It has to be redistributed, both this work kind of between women and men, whether it is child care, whether it is cleaning up the house, washing of the clothes, or this, that would be. So I would need, I am pleading for think tank like Niti Aayog's attention to this. Third would be the, I'm surprised really, national draft policy, which was on a progressive front, it still has remained as draft. I mean, we could not pass this policy. Kind of look at the kind of the masculinity that I am talking about, or social norms that one is being talked about. I was once in a panel on this, in the former Minister of the Women and Child Welfare, and she told me, "Oh, it is going to be 2 weeks. Will be out." And it has been more than 2 years, and nothing has happened to it, and in fact 3 years. So these are the challenges that we are still pushing, but we need to repeatedly point out this. When we do the research, two questions come to our mind. One is that, has the government done enough for women and girls? The small Mudra Yojana is for 500 rupees, Asha workers treatment. I mean, we are all familiar. This is kind of meager reforms for meager human beings or marginalized human beings. These are the policies. We need to recognize there has to be wage disparity is so much, except with the exception of IAS and other women. In the rural areas, full with kind of wage disparities, with the exception of Narega. So if the government wants, I mean, that is a non-governmental position, it can do, it can address the social norm. There have been Hindu Succession Amendment Act, there have been a Domestic Violence Act, Anti-Domestic Violence Act in 2005. Why these laws are not being implemented? Why they are not being implemented like Narega has been implemented? Because these are seen as the soft areas. Women's development comes as the last, is the kind of category, to the point that where India is treated both in terms of culture and modern emerging economies, we had only two, China and India in Asia. Now other countries, look at Bangladesh is surpassing us. I'm not saying that we should be kind of thing, but look at their attention to gender and how their economic development takes place. I mean, how they move on to the ladder of the sustainable development goals. This is a lesson we need to learn when we want to compare ourselves. We are struggling with a lot of things. And I think I very much appreciate your frank discussion, but these KPIs also need to be filled in order to kind of constructive criticism that we have not done enough. Whether it is Mudra scheme or this housing rights or the kind of joint rights, they are not working, that kind of thing. Even joint rights are not working. There was one kind of once admission by the government itself. And I'm so happy that you said about the joint rights or sole rights. So the special attention has to be given to the underprivileged, to the people who are marginalized, to make them on par with the privileged group. So this is the kind of 50% of the population is treated in the attached category. Our social norm is really conditioned on Mrs. So-and-so. So if I'm a man, Mrs. Govind Prasad, Govind Kelkar would be the kind of thing. All my identity, individual rights, everything is lost in one go. So, and so family and state are really the two things that need to be addressed very seriously, because both are in crisis. And they need to be addressed. And if the government cannot do, who else can do? Because we elect we elect our government to make changes, to take us on the right path. And we expect so much from the state that a state has to do. And it's not being done enough. We are going backwards. We have lost some gains. COVID picture of the violence, 100% increase in domestic and other kind of sexual violence in the streets and workplaces that is happening. And that needs really real attention, because the laws have been passed, but law itself is not enough. It is not implemented. So maybe we need a very, very strong voice within parliament and outside parliament in the think tank like Niti Aayog. Thank you very much. Having said that, I enjoyed thoroughly every word of you, what both of you said. Thank you very much. Arjun, over to you, please.
Manorama, ma'am, please.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I will thank Urvashi Prasad ji for this insightful presentation, and Govind Kelkar ji also raising some very pertinent issues. Along with that, Pankhuri Dutt, public policy consultant, economics and finance, Niti Aayog, she has also added some of the very, very pertinent and vital points about the women labor force participation and giving it a different economic angle. In fact, right now, I have the Niti Aayog book in front of me, which is about the ranking of the goals and indicators. I've gone through Strategy 75 also thoroughly. And when we look at this ranking of the goals, I think gender SDG 5 is at lowest tab. It has been at lowest tab throughout the ranking of the state. All across the states, it's completely shown as red. So it's good. I was not expecting Urvashi to speak out like she has actually shown the actual lens. I was not expecting that she will be so thorough in addressing most of the points, like whether we are talking about the safety, or we are talking about health and nutrition, or we are talking about like economic and employability of women. But my concern is, ma'am, I want to raise this question is because I have been public health professional for more than 1 decade, almost 15 years I have been in public health domain. And my concern is that throughout these 10 years, I have been witnessing that we always say that women are anemic. Whenever I visit the hospitals, I have almost visited 184 high priority districts for monitoring RM and CHA. So whenever we go and visit the women who are pregnant and all that, most of them, like for last almost more than a decade, I have been observing is they are, either between like 50-55% are always anemic. And my concern is, one is adherence to, this iron folic supplementation, and then to the adolescent girls with weekly iron folic supplementation that Government of India prescribes. One thing is my big concern is because anemia is not just anemia, it is actually the whole life cycle issue. By delivering stillbirth babies, low birth weight babies, and then the whole gamut of the continuum of care comes in, wherein we have the low birth weight babies with issues like not complete development and those kind of issues coming in. Ma'am, I would definitely request Niti Aayog to come up with some kind of, when it comes to the adherence of the iron folic supplementation and procurement, because there is a huge supply chain issue also when it comes to the iron folic supplementation. There have been, I don't want to name the states here, but there are some states wherein, my people, like core people like NGOs have said that for last 2 years, the iron folic supplementation has not come. And there are pockets and there are those kind of disparities happening. So is there some kind of thing that Niti Aayog can look into as a policy angle that the states have to adhere to, wherein this thing cannot be sort of compromised? One thing is that. And second thing is about the nutrition. Nutrition, again, for so many decades, we have been actually talking about wasting and stunting, but irrespective of that, but India has a huge cohort of wasted and stunted children. So these are the two issues, because it overall impacts the whole, cycle of earning potential and economics and overall the GDP of the country, I should say. So these are the two issues, if you can take it up like with the Niti Aayog. And I was very happy that you spoke about like the MNREGA, where 55% of the women are already like enrolled in. And now post-COVID also, that payment has also gone a bit higher, like it has gone some 219 rupees or something. Earlier it was 180, like something of that sort. So definitely it's plus point for the women. And then one more concern you have addressed now is cervical cancer and breast cancer. These are some of the issues, very, very pertinent issues concerning women, and we need to address it along with reproductive health. I mean, which has again been challenged due to COVID. So some of the issues, if you can look into these kind of aspects. And Arjun, would you like to give a vote of thanks or something?
No, we can have, I think, little bit more discussion.
Oh,
but
sure.
on your part of nutrition, Tata Trust is only helping Niti Aayog for National Nutrition Mission and other things. So Manorma ma'am and Urvashi ma'am, yes, really. I forgot to introduce Ms. Pankhuri Dutt. Ma'am is public policy consultant in the economics and finance wing at the Niti Aayog due to the order. We have Dr. Simi Mehta joining from Ranchi, Jharkhand. Simi, please go.
Yes.
Please be brief.
Thank you very much, Urvashi ma'am and Dr. Pankhuri. Your presentation was really, really illuminating, and Professor Govind Kelkar's remarks and added by Dr. Manorma's remarks, it has been a very fantastic learning experience for me. I have a couple of points to submit. Ma'am, Urvashi ma'am, when you mentioned that Rwanda has invested very heavily in child health services and the newborn and child health over the past 2 decades, and we have a lot to learn from Rwanda, even if they had a not very happy past, so to say. But I believe that even in India, we have invested a lot. However, the implementation has been one of the major issues. The ground level impacts will only be seen when we empower each and every rural household with the access to public health facilities. And in turn, the public health facilities would be ensuring the best of services. But this doesn't happen. It is not possible. It is not happening in India. We may come up with excuses that there are inadequacies, etc. But here again, why do we have to always circle back to the inadequacies of the public health centers or rural health services? And then, to the extent that we are not being able to even provide for the basic fundamental and human right of every child to good health. So we are, and added to that, we are nearing 75 years of our independence. So this remains a far-fetched goal even at this point, and this really needs some serious introspection. So this is my submission. One question is that, and I would really welcome your views on this, ma'am. The next question is that, what are your views on how should the policy proceed on raising the remuneration and formalizing the salaries of Anganwadi workers? I believe that they are the foundation of child health services, and they are overworked and underpaid. So with these, I hand over to Dr. Manorma. Thank you very much again for your wonderful presentation.
Would you like to know some of the these issues what Dr. Simi has mentioned, like going forward, like I mean, as a policy maker, how you will put it across to Niti Aayog or something like that? Because Dr. Simi has spoken about Anganwadi workers, but I have my soft corner for ASHA workers, because I see that ASHAs, they are doing almost 50 odd jobs minimum. And 50 odd jobs, they are being given incentives. So if you will raise the concern of Anganwadi workers, my request is to raise the concern of the ASHA workers also, because they are also like They have the huge geographies wherein they are very, like underpaid for the service.
Right. And added to this, we don't have ASHA workers in all the blocks, in all the centers. And this is one of the dilemmas again in ensuring basic child health services. Yes.
Yes. Should I add few points now, or would you like to come in?
I can just quickly talk on this point, the ASHA and the Anganwadi, because I was going to bring it up myself, so glad it came up. Yes, I think we are looking at this in terms of one, rationalization of their workload, because it's very unrealistic. We expect them to do way too much, and we of course don't match it up with the compensation or the incentives. But even if there's incentives, there's only so much somebody can humanly do effectively. So I think that mismatch has been a very long standing issue in our health system. And so one of the ways we are trying to address it or sort of take it forward with states is actually looking at a comprehensive public health structure, public health cadre structure, where your ASHAs and Anganwadis are one part of it, but the whole burden is not on them. Their roles are more clearly defined. They have proper compensation, proper incentives. And then you have other types of people as well in that cadre who can also supplement and work along with them. Because right now, when we think of frontline, we think of public health, we only think of the ASHAs and the ANMs. And then straight away, then we start thinking of doctors. And so there's a huge gap in between. Public health cadre, which a lot of countries which do well on health actually have. India has historically not really had one, except in very few states. Hardly 1 or 2, 3 states have tried to have this kind of a cadre in place. So we are now working with states on that, and actually there seems to be some high level commitment from most of the states and interest in this also. And we are hoping that after COVID, it will get a further boost, because normally it is very difficult to talk about public health. Nobody really gives it the kind of importance. Whenever we talk of health, we start talking of hospitals, we start talking of curative healthcare. So to really get people to focus on public health and preventive health and think of a proper public health cadre, hopefully this pandemic will, also give some sort of boost to that. But NITI has started working on that actually before the pandemic itself. We started working with states on that. And hopefully, let us see in the next 2-3 years, we should be able to see some amount of good progress on this, because we cannot think of ASHAs and ANMs in isolation. We have to think of them as part of a bigger picture. And we have to define, where do they fit in, exactly what do they do, how much do they do, how much do they get paid for. Only then can we really sort of, take it forward. If we just rely solely on them and, give them a list of 50 tasks, it's humanly also not going to be possible. So that is what we are trying to do, at least from NITI's side, is think of this whole public health management cadre in its entirety. And as a part of that, also address issues of ASHAs and ANM.
Yes. We also have Tanya Agrawal. Tanya, very quickly, yes.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm Tanya, and I am a final year Masters in Economics student at Ashoka University. And I'm also interning with IMPRI. Ma'am, I wanted to know more about what are the government's plans, or what is NITI Aayog doing? There's a huge unemployment rate for the young women. So what does NITI Aayog plan to do about that? I just wanted to know more about this.
Pankhuri, do you want to take that? This is on unemployment.
You'd have to unmute Dr. Pankhuri.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So, I mean, it's just younger women is higher, but if you look at the the unemployment numbers before pre-COVID times also, even the gender gap between graduate males and females is also pretty high. It's 25 percentage points, and in general, it is in 2018 the gender gap was around 12 percentage points, and especially among younger women, as you rightly pointed out, it's high. So. And research also shows that in India, most women are in the labor force when they are not married and when they are without kids. So again, this age group becomes very, very important in terms of policy changes or policy focus. So let me get back to you on what Niti Aayog is exactly doing in terms of narrowing this gender gap. You can share your email ID and I will get back to you on that. But in general, what I can say is that, Professor Kelkar also pointed out that despite of a lot of policy provisions, women are not opting to be a part of the labor force participation rate. These are due to social challenges. These are due to the social fabric. You'll also see that, once women are married, the labor force participation rate falls down. A lot of it is attributed to the fact that the husband makes more money than the wife. So women, they are okay being a part of a household where, they're okay being the caregivers. But this should not be taken in a positive sense. This is actually an issue where educated women, graduate women, are not joining the labor force by choice. The second thing I would like to highlight is that Professor Kelkar pointed out, Bangladesh is doing much better than us when female labor force participation rate is concerned. So Bangladesh could encourage participation by focusing on the textile sector. They actually encourage women to work in a sector, and they supported a sector which usually employs women. So that is a policy provision that has not yet been looked at by India, and that's something where we need to start focusing. Like, women usually work in specific sectors, and we have to start giving provisions in those sectors so that we can ensure that they do not drop out of such sectors. Another, Urvashi has already pointed out that lack of financial access is a big deterrent in the participation of women. And when younger women want to start as entrepreneurs, it's easier for, again, literature shows that it's easier for boys to get family support for the seed capital. When it comes to financial institutions and investors, also, they trust a male entrepreneur, a budding male entrepreneur, more than a female entrepreneur. So, Urvashi has rightly pointed out that there is a difference in the way we, look at applicants for credit, formal credit. Then, so yeah, I would say that these are the top 3 areas where we need to kind of address policy concerns. And the last one I would, so I also spoke about information asymmetry. Women have more information. There's a gender gap in information symmetry also. Women don't have a lot of knowledge about where to find information about jobs, or what are the kind of different jobs that they can work in. There is a lot of cultural stymie that women can only do certain roles or certain hours. All that has to be bridged. When it comes to immigration, men from rural areas can easily come to urban areas to find job. And again, like Urvashi pointed out, that this is an issue. We have to think about these issues when it comes to absorbing women from rural areas into urban economies. Women cannot, because security is a concern. Where they're going to live is a concern. They are usually not aware of their rights, the rights to leave, the right to simple basic human rights. So again, information asymmetry is also the fourth point that needs to be addressed. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me also just quickly highlight, because we are also over time, a few things for this special lecture today by Urvashi Prasad ma'am. Ma'am has really highlighted so many of things. One thing which we really learned today was the example of Rwanda, which ma'am has really highlighted, that how we can also learn from these things. There the labor force participation was also very high, and so many different things. Iceland also have some good example, as they are also topping the rank. And one of the things which they are highlighting is to invest their efforts in the education, especially at early childhood education. Many things ma'am has really highlighted. One aspect which also was very prominent, that in India, the economic empowerment gap was really wide as compared with other countries, vis-a-vis the political, social, and other things. As also our chair is highlighting that is something, joint ownership and many things we have really discussed. One thing ma'am is what suggesting also, and also taking our our focus to was gender monitoring unit. Ma'am, why don't you also enlighten us a little bit more about it, that what is this GMU, and what will be its legitimacy, or because we have National Commission of Women, State Commission of Women, so many now plethora of bodies. So what levers it would have and how it would impact, how it will enable various departments, because there is also heterogeneity among women and among institutions also. Other than that, I really wanted to ask that what is being done in aspect of gender for the aspirational districts or the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao district, because even during the pandemic, we have seen that how India is being portrayed, so many of rape incident, and it gets worsening, every now, even in Corona times, even in Corona ambulance, these things are happening. So ma'am, what do you think, and how can we harness technology in really developed world? There are many buzzers and many things. So how can we do that, and what in terms of tech policy and policy of that sort is something what has been into discussion. Other than that, ma'am really highlighted one thing that was about data, very pertinent point. And I think there is a lot of movement. MOSPI has also come up with something called National Policy on Official Data. And there are several components in that. Niti Aayog has also come up with something called National Data and Analytics Platform, NDAP 2020-21. Ma'am, how do you see in that platform this need for data can be integrated? Your views regarding that. One more thing, I just wanted to know that regarding the Women Entrepreneurs Program, Pankhuri ma'am really highlighted that has been, doing some touching, but not very a large base. How that can be scaled up so that even in, our clusters, urban clusters also making use of that program, because that is a very innovative program and can have a lot of traction. Other than that, I really wanted to ask that what are your views and what are you thinking that can be done for gender, especially in this time of pandemic, especially pertaining to budget 2021 that is now just 2 months away. What has been the preparation in that aspect? What all things could come? I really wanted to highlight that the issue of devices to various women, be it old or young or school going, has been very important. Can there be something in this budget which really provide a push for access to devices, Android phone or anything, to enable and empower them? And how the economic recovery in this post-COVID time, especially using this budget, can mainstream women empowerment and their participation towards this recovery? I'll just stop here, and ma'am, over to you.
Okay, that's a lot of questions.
You can choose to
but I'll try to be brief, and also Pankhuri can chip in with one or two of those. So on the gender monitoring unit, just to clarify, I mean, I don't mean that we need a new body, but within the ministry itself, within the WCD ministry, within the WCD department, if we can just have a dedicated team, even, you don't even need to call it a unit, you can just have a team, which is just regularly collecting, reviewing, and flagging data which pertains to women, because as I said, that data related to women is intersectoral, and therefore it's also interministerial. And there is no one set of people today who actually sits down and reviews all this data and tries to get a holistic picture. So that is what I meant, that we have one dedicated set of people within the ministry itself, within the departments at the state level, who can say, okay, here are all the 10, 15, 20 gender indicators that we have got data on. Now let us look at those, let us review those, let us see where we are lagging behind. So that is really the idea of a unit like this, because what it will do is that it will ensure that issues are highlighted on a constant basis. Right now, like you said, if there's some rape which happens somewhere or something unfortunate happens somewhere, suddenly it comes in the media and then it all dies down. So that's not what we want with women's issues. We want women's issues to be constantly highlighted, and that can only happen when we are constantly looking at this data, right? So mental health, for instance, I mean, I hardly ever see anybody putting out data on specifically on women's mental health, whether it's in the mainstream media, whether it's anywhere. So if we have the government itself looking at this data, putting it out, then it will be very, very important to flag exactly where the issues are. Women with disabilities, do we even really talk about what are the specific challenges that you face if you're a woman and you have a disability? It can almost be like a double whammy, in a society like ours. So how do you deal with that? Now, I will only know how to deal with that, or I will only know what policy to make if I regularly look at the data on that. So that's what I meant by the gender monitoring unit. On technology, yes, we are trying to look at different ways, especially now the post-pandemic technology has got a boost. So we are looking at technology use in different spheres. Of course, even in nutrition programs and other programs, we've tried to bring in technology. But I always say that with technology, it's not just the device. It's not just the product, but it's the whole system that comes with it. Who's going to use that device? How are they going to use it? What benefit will it be? So training people. If you can just give devices to say ashas, anganwadi workers, but if it's not conducive for them to use, if they are not understanding what is the purpose, I'm entering all this data into it, what's the use? Who reviews this data? Who looks at it? So technology is important, but we must build that whole ecosystem around it. And I think that's what we are trying to emphasize, that, it's not just a product, it's not just about a digital product or solution, but it's the entire ecosystem. And it involves people, it involves training people, it involves people's behaviors. So that's all a very crucial part of it. So that's what we're doing on that. Specifically on the budget, I wouldn't have a point of view at this point or information to really comment on it right now. But I'm sure that you will in general see technology, digital sort of definitely playing a role in terms of, where we go forward in various sectors, actually. So you'll see that sort of cross-cutting. But I don't know specifically at this point how it will take shape in the form of the budget. And yeah, women entrepreneurship, Pankhuri, would you like to comment on that, on how we could scale up the women entrepreneurship platform?
Sure, thanks, Urvashi. WEP is actually already looking at the language barrier. So what they realized was that a lot of rural women entrepreneurship are not registering for WEP because English is the main, English is the only language that we use right now. So they are already working on providing this platform to women in rural area in different languages. So again, this is one way of reducing information asymmetry. But again, as you pointed out that, technology is not the only solution. It is a means to an end. So a lot of it is selection also. It's only when women find out about these solutions and when they need these solutions is when they opt for these solutions. So it's the whole ecosystem has to kind of be improved incrementally. And as far as somebody pointed out about technology, that why are we not creating a web page where we can, a website where we can sell the products made by women in rural areas? We already have something like that called Mahila eHeart. But again, I would like to emphasize, I work for the government, but even then I would like to emphasize is that you have to take the women to where the market is. So there are already private platforms where a lot of urban consumers go to buy something as simple as a stapler or, a pencil or a pen. We have websites where we are doing shopping every single day. So these rural entrepreneurs have to be actually brought to these platforms. There is a cost to sell their products on these platforms, so we have to address these asymmetries. That's where the real market is. That's where they'll start gaining profit. And the other part was that again, the products that they sell is not usually they're in certain sectors. So we have to, technology can be used to only a certain extent to answer these questions. It can help them, but these are market-driven changes also. So that's it.
It can we very over time. Can we have Professor Govind Kelkar to conclude in just, or Urvashi ma'am, would you like to make any concluding remark briefly?
No, I think I'm good. I think Professor Kelkar would be the most suitable one to conclude this discussion. So I think we should go ahead with her.
Well, this is volunteering in absentia or volunteering. Huh, Ma? So community volunteering me. Okay, all right. I accept this, but I think a couple of things which or more than a couple of things, a series of things. We have learned a lot. We have learned really a kind of a think tank, which about Niti, which is about advices, which recognizes the progress, but at the same, more important, it recognizes the challenge. Because if we don't recognize the challenge, then we don't make progress. That is very important. That is the why. So talking of the challenge, when I heard first time Urvashi at Terry, I think I was very impressed with you, that kind of thing. And I have, of course, great regard for Niti Aayog also. That has been the kind of. I also at the same time saying this, I have also seeing that challenges that we think that it goes within the government and outside the government in our society, like social norms. These are also the challenges. I am for one, do not really state only the state. I think the market and society is also very, very responsible. Market has become very powerful. So earlier, which was said that market is not responsible, I don't really consider that at all. I think market is very powerful and we need to make market gender responsible. So that kind of thing, whether if women are employed, I have been looking in India at the garment sector. I was surprised to see the kind of thing sexual harassment and supervisors do, which are the male supervisors. So I think the market can take care of these things. And the government rules are there, government policy is there, but market is not implementing with all its power. So the community has to be responsible. And we had very good discussion in the final kind of this thing, where people talk freely and frankly and not treating somebody that, oh, she's from the government circle, so we have to be kind of very kind of polite and all this, because the basic purpose of the exchange or basic purpose in creating a knowledge or the platform where knowledge is created, that we really learn from each other and we also have critique each other, so that some inroads for further knowledge is built. So thank you very much, Urvashi Prasad and Pankhuri Dutt. We really enjoyed learning a lot, and this is the youth we want to lead our future. Thank you. And thank you very much, Manorama. We want donors like you and Tanya, younger people, and of course, IMPRI colleagues are a part of us. So that's why I thank them at last.
Manorama, why not just officially? For the record, you propose a vote of thanks?
I think that, ma'am has already concluded it. We are immensely thankful to Urvashi Prasad ji and Pankhuri for such an insightful and, discussion. I'm also very much thankful to Govind Kelkar madam, who has been always supporting and always giving us the best of, talks and suggestions and way forward recommendations. Not only for gender, for other issues also. I'm thankful to whole IMPRI team that includes Tanya and definitely like Arjun, Simi and everyone else who have come together for putting this program together. Thanks to not only just those IMPRI and other volunteers who have come forward for this event, but thank you to all those who have been weaving this program. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much. Bye. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you for the opportunity.